Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. Today we do have fairly important topics to talk about. However, I am aware that they are topics that are a bit spicy, they're a bit negative, and I'm also aware that a lot of that has been happening on the channel lately. Really, the purpose of this channel is to explore the news, to hold truth to power, and with the overall goal of supporting there being an informed consumer base. So, unfortunately, that does mean that for a lot of news, it is going to involve topics like this. What I'll say is this: my goal is to not stoke the fire of outrage. My goal with this channel is to attempt to give as well-reasoned an outlook of what is happening as I can. So that's really what the plan is with these videos, and with that, let's get into these topics. So first, if you missed the other video that I did today, it was a deep dive on EA's business model and really how some of the incentives behind that are leading to some troubles with their recent game releases. Now for today we have two topics. First, the Anthem reviews are in and they are pretty rough, but almost more importantly, I think they show a very interesting player-critic divide that highlights the inherent differences between playing for fun and playing for work. We then have a very serious topic, with EA Games being accused of forcing a YouTuber to pull his negative review of Anthem, which, of course, directly goes against what EA themselves say are the goals of their Game Changers program. And we're going to talk about this review first. This is a somewhat messy situation, as the YouTuber in question, GGManLives, is a part of the EA Game Changers program. Now that is a program all about generating coverage of their titles, with some of that being sponsored. Of course, that offers people more money than they would otherwise make through YouTube AdSense. Now, GGManLives said that he was sponsored by EA to create this review, and that the review was his honest impressions in spite of the financial transaction. Well, his review indeed was quite critical, and shortly after it went live, he was told to take his video down and remove the EA watermarks. Now, those watermarks are the things that indicate that it was a sponsored part of the EA Game Changers program. Now, when VG247 reached out for comment, the YouTuber said that he was not allowed to say anything negative while the EA logo was there, as their watermark would mean that EA endorses it, going on to say that he didn't really know what it all meant, and that essentially it ended up being a breach of contract. Now, this is quite interesting because EA, or representative from EA, then tweeted saying that nobody has been blacklisted and that their team asked for the video to be taken down because some terms and conditions relating to the disclosure of the sponsored content were not met. And that's why it was taken down, not because of the content. The EA rep then went on to say that they encourage their Game Changers to be honest in their coverage, and that is one of the most important parts of EA's Game Changer program, and that EA think it is very important for audiences to feel that they can trust content with that Game Changers logo. Now, without seeing the exact original video, it's kind of hard to tell what happened here. I did look at his previous EA Game Changers content. Now, Game Changers is mentioned in the description of the video, but quite poorly. It appears below the fold, and it says presented by EA Game Changers. That's pretty weak. It should probably say sponsored by if that was the case, and if so, that should be above the fold, visible from the watch page and ideally from the YouTube video preview. Then after his intro, the EA Game Changers logo appears, but he says, thanks to EA Game Changers for making this possible. If it is a bit of sponsored content, then I don't feel that's good enough. I know that multiple oversight groups, especially I know in the UK, are clamping down on weak euphemisms for the word sponsored. Overall, though, I think his disclosure of it was a little bit weak on that video, but EA's rules are actually quite straightforward. They say that they require full disclosure and that Game Changers have full editorial control, with there being no Game Changer approval process for content. Now, that is for the regular content made by people in the Game Changers program, the stuff that is enabled by the program, but not actually paid for. There's a separate part of their site for sponsored programs saying that the sponsored by EA watermark must be there, including both the audible and the written description. So where does all of this leave us? Well, I think with the YouTuber in question, he said that this was a paid gig. Now that means that the EA logo, sponsored by EA logo, will have had to have been there. Now it could be that he treated a sponsored EA video as an enabled by Game Changers video, giving his review the disclosure package needed for the regular Game Changer program and maybe not for a full sponsored Game Changers video. That would line up with sort of what the EA rep was saying about embracing criticism from Game Changers and that their problems were down to the disclosure. It would be easy to dunk an EA here by default, given how they're EA, but they could actually have a point here. It could be that the YouTuber in question messed up his disclosure a little bit between it being a sponsored or non-sponsored element of the Game Changers program. Alternatively, it could be a case of selective enforcement where this, being a critical video, was quickly targeted for a breach that normally would have been overlooked. Either way, it's not an ideal situation for anyone who is involved. The attachment to a story like this, given the Anthem reviews, is quite a bad look for EA, regardless of whether they are in the right or are in the wrong. It highlights the conflict of interest too between influencers and publishers. Personally, I'm not really that comfortable with things like this. Now, from what I hear, Game Changers is actually a pretty good program to their creators. From what I hear, they do quite a lot of pretty genuine feedback sessions, and I know that some Game Changers are actually in the credits of games like Anthem, but still, when critical content is being made, I think a paid review is pretty problematic. I mean, it's pretty cut and dry in my view. As for this channel, I'm happy to work with a sponsor like Audible or Skillshare or a VPN because there's not a conflict of interest with my core content, but I think what you won't see in this channel is me working with a sponsor like, World of Tanks, because I would feel like that is too close to the core of my content, and even though I wouldn't, go out trying to deceive people, if money's involved, I just want it to be completely disconnected from the editorial content that I'm actually making. So there you go, without hearing more from the parties affected, I think that's really all we can glean from this. Next up, Anthem has a 59 out of 100 on OpenCritic, and there's no getting around how that is a pretty low number for a game like Anthem, especially since many of the, 7 out of 10 plus publications like PC Gamer, they notably ranked it in the 50s. Now, I'm not really one for these precise reviews, to be honest with you, but on aggregate, this does show us that Anthem, is a flawed game from the perspective of critics. Interestingly, the reviews are neither universally negative, nor are they universally mediocre. Boiling it all down to one number does make it seem like it is that way, but in reality, reading through many of these reviews, what do you actually see? You see praise of elements of the game, like the javelins in the world, but yeah, criticism on the rest. And that does show that Anthem is not a game that's devoid of strengths. Many highlighted problems that are, I think, quite typical for the loot shooter subgenre, but, do reflect Anthem generally being a bit weaker than its contemporaries. I'm pretty much actually just waiting for the eventual Jason Schreier report on this game. Now, Jason is very well connected with BioWare, having been able to produce very well-sourced pieces delving into the reasons why Mass Effect Andromeda struggled so much, and even a piece last year that highlighted the troubled development of Anthem. Now, while Jason is a figure that, I think most people have an opinion on, I think we can at least separate the personality from the work, and I think when you do that, you do find that the work is really quite solid indeed. Now, given how well connected he is with BioWare, I would not be surprised if we did see a lengthy report detailing the development woes of Anthem, and that certainly would not be something that is new for this loot shooter genre. Destiny had an extremely troubled development, Destiny 1. Years of work were put into an initial narrative supercut that was rejected by Bungie higher-ups, resulting in a totally new plot being thrown together, with the launch story of Destiny 1 being created in the year pretty much leading up to launch. Much of the game's development was rebooted because of this, with elements like Rasputin and Osiris being scrapped, of course then returning as Destiny 2 DLC. As for Destiny 2, it was actually also rebooted midway through its development process, leaving us with a launch game that had many strong elements indeed, and a lot of polish, but did actually manage to undo much of the good work that its predecessor's post-launch life was able to do. I highly suspect we're going to see a very similar story with Anthem, because when you look at Anthem, you really do see it's clear there is a large backstory to that world, yet barely any of it actually makes it into the core story of the game. We also see that there are very few highly tailored, high-quality missions, i.e. those similar to a mission from Mass Effect or from Halo. Almost all the missions are indeed simply doing objectives in the existing open world, with very little in the way of unique scripted events. Now, when I say scripted, I mean that in terms of gameplay scripting, i.e. developers creating a unique scenario for the players. But yeah, I suppose taking it literally, there's also not a whole lot to the plot as well. Now, we do know that Anthem was in a rough position a year ago, with resources being shifted over from the next Dragon Age to it. I would not be surprised if we find out that, yeah, Anthem was maybe supposed to have a full, high-quality narrative with loads of bespoke, tightly crafted missions, but that was scrapped in favor of the current design to get it out the door. which really does just have missions that are highly similar strings of objectives being done in an instant slice of the existing world map. Basically, their content production seems to have collapsed or something like that. Now, this is not something that massively impacts, say, the combat of the game. Okay, there are actually some rumors that flight was actually added in fully pretty late in the game, which is, I suppose, kind of interesting. I mean, it does explain that, how flight bar and traversal doesn't really make great use of, just the flight feels a little bit like they're not getting as much out of it in combat, and sometimes being able to fly, it just kind of feels like having no clip, and it renders their geometry a little bit moot. And indeed, I actually found when playing the game that some of the most fun combat I had was when there was like a flight suppression field, and I'd have to be doing, sprinting and my dodge boosts and stuff, and the double and triple jumps. And overall, I mean, it is really sad that things turned out this way, because personally, I actually really wanted to play a loot shooter set in a robust BioWare world. As for me, I've put 20 hours into this game. I don't think I'm going to be putting any more in for at least a few months. I'm totally willing to give this game another shot once they add some more content through the free live service. And I suppose it does for me highlight the difference between playing games to create critical content and playing games purely for fun. When I play a game like this, especially for the channel, I kind of do it primarily as a critic. I'm mostly interested in the craft of video games, how they're constructed, how developers implement different designs to varying different levels of success. So for me, I view it with a critical eye, looking to point out what works, what doesn't work, and why. And I suppose as well for me, part of that is because I also develop games with my team being about to enter production on a major project. So for me, analyzing games in that way, about both the individual parts and the sum of their parts, it's a very valuable exercise. Now, I do think that most game critics do this, and that's particularly rough in a game like Anthem that is so rocky in its execution. Now, the player's perspective is a little bit different, because if you're playing Anthem as a loot shooter fan first, then the criticisms of the narrative that I spent 10 minutes on, they probably won't matter to you. Really, maybe the only thing that'll matter to you is the quality of the combat, the loot system, and the replayability of the content. And I think that means that many players who are playing Anthem would rate it quite a bit higher than what critics do. Perhaps still a bit lower than other examples of the genre, because I think it's fair to say that some of those systems are rather underdeveloped and there is a pretty low quantity of content, but I think it is worth bearing that in mind, I suppose, as somebody who tries to be a critic of games. Overall, it is rather bad news from BioWare, with Anthem being the studio's worst received title to date, with overall scores actually coming in well below those of Mass Effect Andromeda. Now, as I said in my 20-hour review, the BioWare elements kind of take away from the loot shooter elements, and the loot shooter elements, well, they kind of take away from the traditional BioWare elements of the game, and that does just all combine to produce a game that feels in some ways a little bit poorly thought out. I mean, come on, they actually have an RPG that doesn't have a stat page, which is a little bit insane. Now, many are likely worried about this studio's closure, given the situation with Ragtag and Visceral, but I kind of doubt that's the case. EA would really lose out on a large segment of their core market without BioWare, and, well, we know that the Battlefield franchise is not as widely popular as Activision Blizzard's Call of Duty franchise, seemingly also having a lower conversion rate on its microtransactions. I mean, certainly Battlefield 5, it's nowhere near the absurdity of the monetization of Black Ops 4. So I actually do think that BioWare are safe for now, and I think this game probably is something that they will stick with for, a good amount of time. And I mean, ultimately, I do wish them every success in the world. Like, if the game comes out and the game's not good, and I do believe that is the case, I'm going to say that. But I'm going to say that knowing that if I come back to the game in 6 months and they've really turned things around, I'm absolutely going to praise them for it. That's what we've got to do. We've got to be honest about being negative, but we also have to be honest about being positive whenever people are able to, turn things around. I suppose they've now ended up with an underdog story, and like with all good underdog stories, I hope they're able to persist through and come out on top. And I mean, I actually don't know if this video is going to make it up today, but if it does, like Fallout 76, Bethesda just unveiled their roadmap for the year. And ultimately, yes, there's so much has been done wrong with that game. But if they're able to turn it around through content updates that they're not charging people for, that's a good thing. It's just like how, with No Man's Sky, I think a lot of people rightly tore it up at launch, especially because of essentially the lies that were involved. But we equally have to give Hello Games praise when they stick with that game, doing free content updates for years after launch. So hopefully something like this happens for Anthem. Hopefully the overall game experience eventually does live up to the core nugget of fun that they definitely do have right now, and that is the javelins being really, really cool. So there you go. That's my take on this whole situation, and you know what? I think that might be all the Anthem content that I have in the tank for right now. Hopefully the next time I talk about this game, it'll be 6 months in the future and there will have been a bunch of great updates to talk about. That's what I really hope happens. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.